All right. So, let's see who's here. Nick's here. Thomas is here. The Master of Context is here. Oh my good lord, what has had to Obsidia Black, what has happened to you? Are you okay? Blink twice if you need help right now. What's happened? Oh god, he's an orc. Plasmatic is here. Alright, let's see. Our Nukes is here. Quilla's here. Ronnie's here. And yes, it was the size of the Emperor yesterday. Let's see. BCG Veetan is here. Yumbring. Dark Innovator. Tony Yule. Everybody is ready to go. Aquila says he's one of the boys now. Is giant space bugs of death time. Indeed, John Hamilton. Blood Angels are deploying. Sawyer, you're making Turkish coffee? Sounds good. Oh, it's, I've been feeling under the weather the past couple of days, so this is just probably a side effect. It'll probably clear up in a little bit, though, with me talking, because I have been talking for the past, 12 so hours. I have a fluff on my shirt. What is this? Help me. Help me. Help. Oh, God. That's going to bother me all day if I don't get that off. What is this? Okay, it's off. Yesterday. Alright. Big bugs, lots of protein. That's disgusting. Hey, you fearless bird. What's up? Alright. So. We're at the Tyranid acquisition. This is how the Inquisition lets you know they're pissed at you without telling you they're pissed at you. Yes, it's the snack that bites back. The warp is I feel the warp overtaking me. It is a good pain. No. Make a Tau Earthcast go splouch on the Inquisitional windshield. This is true. Alright. We are on a new part that some of you are saying is your favorite part. Sawyer, who are you playing in Bannerlord? Are you playing, let's see, are you playing Empire? Are you playing Valandians? Valandians always struck me as being just, there's never, it's like, Valandians are like orcs. There's always more knights. Let's see. Let's see, Declonius. Hey, boss, just wanted to let you know that your recent interest in my little blasphemy has ignited my passion for it. Next chapter drops in the week. Thank you. Oh, no. Sawyer playing the Welsh. Obsidia, don't worry about it, bud. And I understand. Like, I've had to tell people several times during the weekend from around 11 to 3, don't call me because I'm in the middle of something. Let's all remember our friend Frank hanging out on the Occurrence border. Yes. Let's remember all of our old friends hanging out on the Occurrence border right now in the poker room. All right. So, if you're wondering what's going on with my voice, I just woke up. Plus, I still got this thing going on with my ears. It's just driving me crazy. Chapter 36 of Star Wars versus 40K will be released on the 8th of August. Let's check what date that is. Oh, so that is going to be next. The Monday after next. Nice. Nice. Alright, so. Who is ready for some Tyranids? It should be none of you. It should be absolutely none of you. Ronnie says, boss, I left the recipe for ground Eldar above. Nice. I want some, you think it'll go good with tacos? I'm just saying. Josh Tompkins is here. Lord Halder's Butter Gang rise up. Yes. The Butter Gang is, if you don't know what the Butter Gang is, it's a meme from Bannerlord, but it is the Valandians in the nutshell. Basically, it was bound to happen at some point, but it happened in both ears. I actually have something with this ear right here in particular, where I have to be careful when I take care of it, or else it does cause a problem. But I've been going through this for about a week now. It's just become noticeable, like really audibly right now. When do you have your tacos? I'm hoping. The hive mind is here. Everybody, virus bomb the hive mind. Anyhow, oh my god. Dark Elite asks, if you had to pick between fighting a Primarch and a fist fighter facing a squad of custodians in a fight, which would you pick? I'm dead either way. What does it matter? I'm dead either way. I'm screwed. It's gone. Speaking of aliens, Diclonius. Speaking of aliens, I'm going to be working with Arco because Arco just released his D&D primer for his new race in D&D, and it's called the Inari. And he described it as, I always wanted to play Xenomorphs in D&D. Well, he asked if, we could do something about that. And I said, sure. So, be looking out for, an ad, if you will, that I'm going to be putting in some of the videos that I do in the future that specifically me and him are going to be working on. In fact, later today. Thank you, Daniel Morgan. Who do you think is the better general, Macarius or the Lion? The Lion. Just because the Lion is the Lion. Macarius is incredible. Probably, not even probably, in the top 3 generals of all time. But you're talking human versus demigod there. Oh yes, make Old Men Reacts go to the Tyranid arc. Truly a play in the making for the generations. Yes. Press the refurbish button. Okay, I'm press the... Darius, I don't know if he did, I know that there's certain things that he did not leave in there, but there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff me and him have to go over with it. Alright, here we go. Here we go.
Interrogator Greg Sargent stood with his group of experts and contemplated the door.
Thank you, Daniel.
It was larger and fancier than any of the others in the hallway. And it was also the only door that had been welded shut. The words psycher holding cells could just barely be seen under the swaths of prayer seals that covered the door. Sarge shuddered at the memories those words dredged up, and silently cursed whoever had decided to leave the damned section in during the ship's refit.
Yay!
At a wave from Sarge, Chief Engineer Old Bill and Senior Engineer Jim moved forwards. They ignored the official little yellow plaque, which promised a slow and painful death for anyone who opened the door, and began cutting. At the back of the group, Senior Engineer Hannah and the ship's confessor explained why the door had been sealed to a worried-looking xenologist adept. When the xenologist started backing away and suggesting that he really didn't need to personally inspect the cells, Sarge cut in and assured him that the demon which had haunted the place was very thoroughly dead.
Thoroughly.
Once the door was cut open, the confessor led the way inside with a censer in one hand and a flamer filled with holy promethium in the other.
Holy promethium!
Sarge thought the priest seemed disappointed when nothing jumped out and tried to eat his soul. The confessor gave the all clear, and the whole group trooped in and started assessing the cells. The main room was circular, filled with several pieces of arcane machinery, and was connected via very thick doors to a dozen child-sized holding cells. 11 of those cells were open, and looked exactly the same as when Sarge had last seen them. The 12th didn't. Instead of the ominously locked door he remembered, it was a jagged crater, partially filled with debris from its half-collapsing ceiling. The delicate machinery immediately around the crater had been turned to scrap by door shrapnel, and a few clawed footprints could be seen in the wreckage. One by one, the technical experts reported their findings to the xenologist adept. Old Bill reported that the warp presence shroud was missing a certain key component, and would be barely functional. The xenologist asked if missing meant it might be found somewhere, and
I have to do something just based off general principle. Mordrek lives. There we go.
And Sarge explained that in this case it meant that the piece was welded into the warp drive. Old Bill recommended leaving that part where it was. Jim followed that up with the news that the cell's psi suppressor had been badly damaged, but he was reasonably confident that by cannibalizing parts and reducing coverage, it could be gotten back up to 80% power.
Are we essentially refurbishing the containment field? They're gonna... No.
Jim refused to guess whether that was Delta, Epsilon, or lower level psi suppression, citing his own lack of any idea how the damned thing worked. The xenologist winced at hearing this. Finally, Hannah reported that all 11 intact stasis units were in working order.
Okay.
The problem was that unless the specimen was going to be child-sized, there was
no
way to fit it in one. Putting it half inside a stasis field would result in a half specimen. Trying to overlap the fields would result in a rather large explosion. There was no Mechanicus-approved method for kludging multiple stasis units into a larger one.
Oh, God.
When the xenologist claimed that there was no way anything would work without a stasis field, Hannah grudgingly admitted that Tink and his assistant might have some not entirely orthodox way of doing it.
Okay, you know there's no... Oh, God, there's no hope. There's no hope. Even people that have an idea of what these people do are recommending Tank. This is a Oh, God. Thank you, Aquila. It's the occurrence border. Refurbish is as good as you're going to get. Yes, the occurrence border is a refurbishment of a refurbishment at this point. Why are there 6 of them?
Sarge groaned at that, but didn't actually say anything. Everyone went quiet as the adept digested the lackluster reports. In the silence, Sarge noticed a faint sound coming from the debris-clogged cell. A laser pistol practically materialized in his hands, and he motioned everyone except the well-armed confessor back. As the 2 men carefully pushed aside pieces of wreckage, the sound grew clearer. It was a sort of far-off chattering, screaming sound, mixed with what sounded like the thump of heavy crates being moved around.
No.
And a familiar nasal voice talking to itself.
Slacker. Thank you, Slacker. Which chapter battle cry is your second favorite? We already know your first is the Black Templar. For those we love, we die in glory. Lamenters.
Everyone in the room
Thank you, Slacker.
Except for Sarge, who thrust his head as far as he could into the wrecked cell and bellowed, "God damn it, Nubby!" There was an inarticulate scream and the sound of several objects falling over. When the clattering died away, a plaintive, "Bloody hell, Sarge, what you doing down here?"
Oh, God.
drifted out from somewhere in the rear of the cell. Sarge began ripping out pieces of wreckage in an effort to find where the trooper was hiding. As he worked, the enraged non-com embarked on what was about to be an epic chewing out.
Yes.
What am I doing? What am I doing?
Every once in a while, because I was a non-com myself, every once in a while your subordinates will put you in such a funk that eventually the only thing left to do is to let them know your displeasure in the most flagrant and brutal way possible.
What are you doing, you little idiot? And why, in the Emperor's name, are you doing it in the psycher holding cells?
We don't want to know what he's doing.
Nubby's tone grew panicked as he registered Sarge's fury. I ain't doing nothing.
I ain't doing nothing.
And you made me promise not to go nowhere near your stupid cells. I'm just minding my own business down at the bottom of the lifts.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
This gave Sarge pause. And in the silence, the faint chattering screaming he'd been hearing under Nubby's voice finally registered. Sarge groaned as the realization hit him. The confessor, who didn't know Nubby quite as well, asked if he was in the chapel to the Emperor located in the deck below the lift to the bridge. Nubby's hesitant reply of, "Sorta," was cut off by Sarge. "Nubby, are you using the containment area inside the chapel?
He is.
The one we built
Yes.
around the unholy, screaming crater
Yes.
the Cogden left when he died to store contraband?"
Yes.
No?
Airlock
Really,
Nubby.
Nubby?
Airlock
Well,
Nubby now.
No,
He's going to
not
fuck it
really
up.
Contraband, per se.
Oh, God.
Just like odds and ends.
Odds and ends.
God damn it, Nubby. It's not like anyone was using it. While Sarge and the confessor both sputtered in a mix of horror and frustration, Jim raised the question of how the conversation was actually happening. Sarge couldn't see anything through the gaps in the debris beside the cell's rear wall. He grudgingly ordered Nubby to search the containment room for any sort of communicator or portal. Nubby followed their voices and reported the glowing crater left by the dead Cogden as the source. He hesitantly asked if glowing metal could be a portal, and if he should try poking it with something.
No!
Sarge's answer was drowned out by a screeching flood of demonic and binary screaming.
Yay.
The noise rose to a crescendo as the far wall of the cell started glowing and a jagged length of metal poked through. The blade flailed around like a snake stuck in a hole, and slowly hauled something that looked like a cross between a lasgun's barrel and a demonic skull out behind it. Sarge leapt aside as the confessor ran forwards and hosed the back of the cell with sanctified promethium. When the noise finally died down, Nubby's voice returned and asked if anyone had seen where his lasgun had gone after the metal ate it.
It's already starting. We're not even 10 minutes into this, and I already want to airlock Nubby again. Why does he do the things that he does?
Sarge told them it was probably time to get a new gun from Tink,
Yes.
and ordered the trooper to return to his quarters immediately,
Oh my god.
without
Get a new gun
any
from
of
Tink?
his odds and ends. As the faint sound of Nubby's metal footsteps and curses faded away, Sarge turned to where the xenologist was trying to hide behind old Bill. Right. We'll worry about that later. Back to why we're actually down here. You heard the reports. Do you think we can do it?
No.
Okay, just to be clear. Yes. We have a psycher containment area with almost no warp presence shrouding.
Almost no.
An indeterminate amount of psi suppression, and a stasis field that'll be kludged together from smaller units by that mad Xenos you've got hiding in your quarters.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And you're asking if we can use this area, which is already so tainted that it's manifesting major phenomena, to hold a live Tyranid zoanthrope for a months-long warp voyage.
What could go
That's
wrong?
right. That is quite literally the worst idea I've ever heard.
No, then apparently you haven't been with them for long enough.
The all-Guardsmen party. Tyranid acquisition experts.
Oh my god.
So no shit, there we were.
No shit.
Heading out beyond the fringes of Imperial space to capture a Xenos psycher, which we would then have to haul, kicking and screaming, halfway across the galaxy.
Yes.
There were probably shittier missions out there, but that wasn't much comfort. Saying it could always be worse loses its charm when things actually do keep getting worse.
I don't see how it
The
can.
only thing that kept us from labeling it...
I don't see how it can at this point. I really don't. They're being sent after a rare strain of Xenos. They're being sent after a rare strain of Xenos that is based off Eldar DNA. They're being sent after a rare strain of Xenos that uses psychic powers all at the same time, with all these pre-existing conditions going into it. This... oh... Stop invoking Malal? Malal doesn't exist. What are you talking about?
As a suicide mission was the fact that a force from the Emperor's Scythe Space Marine chapter would be leading the actual capture effort.
Stop trying to make Malal canon.
In fact, it was technically their mission. We were just supposed to assist them in the capture, then handle the transport. The fact that we'd be working with and fighting alongside a team of Space Marines didn't actually make us much happier, though. I mean, sure, the Marines are the greatest warriors in all the Imperium. Near immortal demigods of war and all that. But we'd been in our share of battles. Every one of us had seen what inevitably happens when the Astartes get called in. The quickest way for a Guardsman to meet the Emperor is to be anywhere within a 10-kilometer radius of one of his angels. Sadly, the assignment had come directly from...
No, traditionally, the reason that it's the quickest way for somebody to get, sent to the Emperor's side is to be, the reason behind that is because when the Space Marines are there, usually things are absolutely tits up.
From Inquisitor Oak. So there was nothing we could do to avoid it. No matter how insane the mission, how bad our equipment, and how certain our deaths. There was nothing short of desertion that would get us out of our orders. So, we went to work preparing our equipment and took solace in the most sacred right of all soldiers. Complaining.
There you go.
To start with, Tink complained about how unfair it was to stick him and Theo, our semi-captive Tau scientist, with so much to do in so little time.
Fuck you. Do it.
The two of them worked furiously on the problem of combining the smaller stasis units into a larger one.
Refurbishing stasis
while
units.
Simultaneously trying to cram more pulse weapons into lasgun disguises and build Spot 2.0. Their efforts were seriously hampered by the fact that Tau science isn't anywhere near as advanced when it comes to stasis fields, or anything related to psychers for that matter, as it is on the subject of plasma or drones. Then on top of that, there was the whole heretical xenotech on an Imperial vessel issue.
Yes.
The xenotech problem wasn't as serious as it used to be. Replacing all our annoying old cogboys with slightly less annoying young cogboys had resulted in far more liberal outlook among the ship's tech priesthood. Sarge still insisted on a moderate amount of discretion, though, which caused significant slowdowns, especially when combined with Jim's newfound stodginess as head cogboy. Mr. I'm a big boy now head engine seer Jim flat out insisted that none of the junior tech priests were allowed to even work in the same room as Theo, much less lend a mechadendrite.
Slacker asks, could mankind during the Dark Age of technology evenly fight the Necrons? If not, how long until they could? Humanity during the height of the Dark Age technology was capable of some crazy shit. And I mean some outright crazy shit. It's the reason the STCs are worth so much to humanity. And I mean, if you take a look at it, the Contemptor Pattern Dreadnought, not the Contemptor Pattern, what was it? The Castigator Titan was actually an STC, and that thing was bigger than an Imperator. And the planet that they found this on would be capable of just cranking these things out. So there were some incredible things that that humanity was capable of during the Dark Age technology. So could they fight the Necrons? Probably. All Death Corps troopers, get in line. It's time. Yes, get in line. They might be able to fight the Necrons easily. We'll just never know. Death Corps troopers in line. Mordek, you're going with them. All right. Let's see. I wouldn't want to work with Tink's pet pal either. It's not even a litter box trained, Ronnie. Thank you, Slacker. Okay, here we go.
We sort of understood that it was all for the safety of the Acolytes, who might get in deep trouble if they displayed bad habits in their future postings. But it slowed things down considerably. Tink wound up drafting Sarge and most of the Adepts as assistants. None of them were very helpful, mind you, but the fact that they were suffering with him cheered Tink up immensely. Jim, Hannah, and old Bill did their fair share of complaining too. The projects they were working on weren't much easier than Tink's. And they also were trying to keep the ship running and train their new recruits.
Mm-hmm.
In the long run, the fresh batch of Cogboys was probably going to work out wonderfully.
Yay.
But in the short term, it was complete mayhem. Hannah had it especially bad, since she was the one in charge of the newbies while the others ran their projects. She was driven to the edge of hysterics by a constant barrage of questions and problems, ranging from trivial to potentially fatal, from the Acolytes. The poor cog girl hid from them in our barracks more than once. While the technical folks whined about overwork, Doc, Fumbles, and the Xenologist Adept complained to anyone who would listen about being used as human guinea pigs. Really, all of them understood that there was no other option for testers, and the containment area had to be tested.
Yes, it does.
They just hated the fact that said testing consisted of the Xenologist coaxing Fumbles into trying to manifest the sort of powers a zoanthrope might use.
That's gonna be rough.
While Doc stood around and waited to fix whatever went wrong.
Oh, God.
And when you combine Fumbles trying to use powers outside his comfort zone, a high-stress environment, and the quality of the containment area, you better believe things went wrong.
Yes, of course.
At least Doc did get a lot of practice fixing up injured Cogboys.
Oh, good lord.
So there was some silver lining. The only members of the team who weren't involved in preparing the containment area were Nubby, Twitch, and Amy. Of course, they didn't let that stand in their way of bitterly complaining.
No, why would they?
In fact, they used their free time to complain harder.
Hey.
The three of them wandered around the ship on their patrol of the tainted areas, looking for warp phenomena and demon incursions, while whining to each other about their sorry lot.
Yes.
Nubby had a whole slew of grievances, mostly with Sarge. The chewing out he'd received for appropriating the screamy crater room as a warehouse was minor compared to the one he'd gotten when he went back in there. Originally, he'd only intended to clear out his stash, but then Tink and Theo had requested he run a few experiments. For science, they said.
For science.
Nubby felt it was entirely unfair that he'd received all the blame for the incident with the crater and the rat.
Why would that be considered unfair? Thank you, Daniel Morgan. Daniel asks, you ever wonder if it would actually be better in the long run if Big E had wiped out the Mechanicus? Okay, so big picture, the Mechanicus not existing in the modern day Imperium, there's a couple of institutions that would make the Imperium better off. The Mechanicum right now is actually holding things together, as far as doing its part to hold up what's left of the Imperium. If he had, though, he would have put Perturabo in charge of what would have become the new Mechanicum. But, yeah, I do think sometimes it would have been a good idea to wipe out the Mechanicus, but he would not have been able to at any point, because the Mechanicus, up until a good, I'd say, 75 years into the Great Crusade, the Mechanicus was simply more powerful. But at the same time, it is what it is when it comes to that. They hoarded the knowledge. The Emperor let them stay that way. I'm guessing there might have been an idea of what to do about them after the Great Crusade was over, but they weren't going to do it then. Yes, Dark Innovator, you're correct. Dark Innovator says, did the Emperor plan to replace the Mechanicus, but he never managed to get that far? Yes. I fully believe that Perturabo was going to be put in that place, either him or Ferrus Manus, but I lean heavily toward Perturabo. And the reason I say that is just because Perturabo had a mind for all things in that regard. In any case, do I think Perturabo can be reformed back into the Imperium? I don't think so.
Anyway, the mutated rodent hadn't actually hurt anyone. It had just chased a tech acolyte around for a while.
Mutated rodents,
and then spontaneously combusted.
Yay!
So Nubby grumbled continuously about how unreasonable Sarge had gotten since his promotion, and the fact that he wasn't even allowed to hang out with Fumbles during tests on account of being disruptive to the work environment. Twitch had been driven to a significantly higher than usual level of paranoia by the news that he'd be sharing the ship with a Tyranid. This was compounded by the ban on indiscriminate booby traps that Sarge had enacted after several of the acolytes had gotten themselves injured. The cherry on top, and primary focus of Twitch's complaints, was the fact that Doc had refused to move back into the barracks after his legs had finished healing. Doc claimed his preference for sharing quarters with his hospitalier girlfriend wasn't a slander on the quality of Twitch's defenses, but the demolitions trooper didn't buy it. He interpreted this decision in the same way he did most things, as a complex conspiracy to make him unhappy.
Doc doesn't want to come back because he's shacking up with his hospitaler girlfriend. Take the hint, Tank.
Finally, bringing up the rear of the little parade of misanthropy was Amy, who had perhaps the pettiest gripe of all of us. Her hair was messed up. Doc's girlfriend had done a wonderful job of repairing the second set of facial burns our markswoman had received, and she'd used some special hospitalier trick to repair Amy's scalp. Unfortunately, Amy was completely fixated on the fact that the treatment had left a hand-wide stripe of pure white running through her now buzz-cut hair.
Why are you bitching? That's awesome.
None of us really knew why she cared so much. Amy hadn't been particularly vain in the past. It was odd that this specific thing loomed so large. Perhaps it was because Nubby had the poor taste to say it made her look like a skunk.
Of course. And why would you pay attention to anything that Nubby ever says, ever?
The three troopers shared their displeasure with just about everything they ran into, whether it was a minor warp beastie, mutant crutoid, or newbie tech priest. Amy particularly took grim delight in asking every acolyte she saw if they thought her hair looked funny, then doing mean things to anyone who gave the wrong answer.
Oh, that's
there wasn't a right
outlook.
one. By the time we were nearing our rendezvous, their antics, as well as the rest of the team's general attitude, had reached such a level that the captain actually took notice.
Oh my god.
It took a bit of work for Sarge to placate the captain, even though the man was ex-Navy and should have automatically understood the situation. Sarge didn't have any trouble getting across that most of our squad had an especially strong dislike for fighting Tyranids,
yes,
and psychers for that matter. The problem was that morale is a far different thing on a ship than it is in a trench.
True.
So the captain didn't see why that excused our behavior. Sarge eventually managed to explain that while veteran guardsmen can handle just about anything on the battlefield, they have relatively few coping mechanisms for dealing with slowly impending doom. He asked if the captain...
That's just being alive for a guardsman, I'm just saying.
...would prefer to have us staggering around blind drunk, or taking a more proactive approach to staying alive. The captain agreed that a bit of complaining and misbehavior was better than Twitch manufacturing reasons why we couldn't complete the mission.
Yes.
In the end, Sarge promised that we'd be ready for action when the time came, and quietly hoped like hell that he was telling the truth. Luckily, it turned out he was. On the final day of our warp travel, everything started to come together. The first break was when Tink and Theo successfully managed to put the largest servitor on the ship into stasis. Actually, it was originally the second largest servitor, but the overlapping fields had gotten out of sync on the previous test and messily rearranged that hierarchy.
Oh.
Anyway, the test was such a resounding success that they hauled the whole thing down to the cells and crammed fumbles into it before anyone could stop them. Aside from how long it took them to safely get our psycher back out of there, the live test went perfectly. Fumble's aura completely vanished when the field was activated.
Yeah, there you go.
And everyone working in the cells cheered.
Oh, God.
Even Jim seemed happy, despite the way he was chivying his acolytes out of the room and explaining that they were definitely not seeing a Tau or a techno-heretical stasis device. The news that we'd be transporting a stasist Tyranid psycher, as opposed to one that was actively trying to kill us, perked everyone up. All of us set aside our little distracting grievances as our warp voyage ended. Well, except for Amy and Twitch, that is. The demolitions trooper's behavior wasn't surprising, but the fact that Amy had to be restrained from beating Nubby to death with the bottle of hair dye he acquired for her was worrying. Fortunately, neither of their obsessions prevented them from prepping for battle. And everyone was ready to kick some ass when we finally reached our destination. When I say we were ready for action, I mean it. We were literally standing in the shuttle bay when the occurrence border came out of warp.
Okay.
The Space Marines weren't going to catch us sitting around and asking for 5 minutes before the mission. No siree. So it was sort of awkward when there wasn't anyone at the rendezvous.
Huh.
We stood in the bay for an hour before we gave up in disgust. While the rest of us wandered off, muttering blasphemous remarks about the Emperor's Angels of Death and their idea of punctuality as we did so. Sarge headed up to the bridge to see what the hell was going on. We'd really expected to find the Marines there ahead of us. It's not like we had a very fast ship. We'd even entertained the faint hope that they'd already have the zoanthrope tied up and ready for us.
That would be lovely,
Either
but that's
way,
not
it'd
going to be the
be
case.
a matter of in and out before the Nids even realized we were there.
Mm-hmm.
At least, that's what we'd hoped for. It was rather unsettling to find ourselves sitting absolutely alone at the far end of a hostile system. It didn't stay unsettling for long, though. When we took a look around and saw just how hostile the system was, we bumped the situation up to outright terrifying. Now, we'd all read Oak's orders. It was obvious that the system would be a battleground. Not even Marines are suicidal enough to try this sort of thing in a wholly Tyranid-controlled system. None of us had been optimistic enough to bet on finding a system that was being cleansed by a massive Imperial fleet. But we'd hoped that our destination would be some Imperial frontier world that just wasn't on our maps. Preferably one that had just been reinforced by a few regiments of guard, and was fighting off a very small splinter fleet. Of course, if we couldn't get a world with more guardsmen than Nids, we'd have happily settled for any Imperial presence, regardless of how many bugs there were. Hell, we would have been happy with one of those weird independent systems you get out here, or even a Tau world, so long as they were busy with the Nids.
I'd be happy with a Tau ward if they were busy with the Nids.
All we'd really wanted was a system where the fight was sort of even, and one side wouldn't be shooting at us.
Yes.
Instead, what we saw when the occurrence border's scanners came online was 4 planets, 4 hive ships, and thousands, if not millions, of far smaller ships. A closer inspection revealed that the little vessels were inorganic, and that they were attacking the hive ships with mixed success.
Okay.
Sarge left the bridge shortly after the first detailed scan came in. Sarge came down and gave us the bad news. It was something we needed to know after all,
Yes,
but
let's
he
go.
took the precaution of stopping at the med bay on the way down. Even with the heavy trank and the Hospitalier's help, Twitch nearly managed to escape with our ship's pipework before Sarge finished telling us about the little ships. They hadn't been Imperial, or Tau fighters,
oh God, what's
or
up?
even Eldar for that matter.
It's orcs.
Every single one of the smaller craft had been a ramshackle contraption
It's orcs.
held together by a combination of spit, red paint, and a complete refusal to understand or even acknowledge the laws of physics.
It's orcs.
Orcs.
It's
Why
orcs.
did it have to be orcs?
It had to. Twitch is gonna lose his mind.
The occurrence border spent
Part
the
2.
next few days being as still and quiet as it possibly could. Meanwhile, everyone inside it ran around in frenzy of preparation that put our earlier efforts to shame. None of it.
And orcs and nids in the same system. This is already gonna be bad. This is already gonna be bad.
It was directed towards improving the Zoanthrope containment area anymore, though. Instead, it was all focused on keeping us alive long enough to capture the bloody thing. Armsmen drilled on repelling borders. The ship's lances were brought up to as close to functional as they'd ever been.
Yeah.
And Tink finished getting everyone equipped with pulse weapons while Theo put the final touches on Spot 2.0. The rest of us trained with our new weapons and kept Twitch from doing anything crazier than usual. On the third day, we were all called up to the bridge by the captain. Well, only Sarge and the Adepts were called, but the rest of us were tired of all the horrible waiting. A very brief message telling us to hold our position and wait for secure comm contact was replayed for us. The captain told us he hadn't seen any other vessels enter the system and didn't even have a hard source for the comm message. Just a vague direction. That was rather disturbing, but no one except Twitch could figure out a way it could be a trap. The captain and Sarge decided to wait and see what happened next. After half an
Chicken Wing gets the comment of the stream so far. Chicken Wing says, "Told you, it's always orcs, unless it's nids. Then it's orcs."
hour, another message came in. An incredibly deep voice that practically screamed Space Marine.
Mordrick, this is not worse. This is not worse. Remember, orcs are only terrifying when you're the one fighting them. When you're the one watching other people have to deal with orcs, they're fucking wonderful.
Identified itself as Sergeant Gravis of the Emperor's Scythes, and instructed us to lower our shields so he could dock. As the captain did so, Sarge squared his shoulders and picked up the Vox's handset, only to have the officer manning it tell him that we still didn't have a target for a secure channel.
Nice.
The man asked Sarge if he should just broadcast generally, and Sarge agreed.
Oh, God.
He got about halfway through introducing himself before the Marine voxed back, and told him to cease broadcasting before he alerted the whole system. Sarge sheepishly hung up the vox and vented some frustration by asking the communications officers what he meant by still didn't have a target. It was quickly revealed that sensors still hadn't detected the Marine's ship.
Oh, Lord.
Despite it being close enough to worry about docking.
Thank you, Slacker. Twitch is going to go nuts. Everyone. It's just fracking orcs we need to prepare. Twitch. Paranoia goes up 1,000% and every explosive goes missing. And yes, I do not think that we need to give Twitch a virus bomb. I think, giving him the nuke was bad enough. Thank you, Slacker. I appreciate it,
bud. The
bud.
sensor text claimed that the incoming ship must be shuttle-sized and have some good stealth systems.
It's going to be a strike cruiser.
But they were sure to spot it when it requested final docking instructions.
It's going to be a strike cruiser.
Tink, not very quietly, suggested that instead of the Marine's ship being very stealthy, the tech's systems were just complete shit. He then volunteered to have them upgraded to modern standards after the mission.
Oh my God.
The ensuing argument was brought to a halt by the Marine voxing back and telling us to reactivate our shields and close the shuttle bay doors. While most of us laughed at the sensor techs for not spotting a ship before it landed on us, Doc raised the question of where the Marines had landed. We hadn't actually opened the bays yet. Unsurprisingly, given that they were the ones who'd patrolled the ship the most, Nubby and Twitch figured it out first. Both troopers screamed at Sarge to stop the Marine.
Oh,
Sarge
no.
and the captain both caught on to what had happened at the same moment that the text
Oh,
pinpointed
no.
the Marine's ship in the foremost bay on the top of the occurrence border.
Yay.
The one in the badly warp-tainted area near the prow,
Hey, it's
which was
practice.
left open and airless at all times, and was never to be used. The two normally stoic men frantically ran towards the communications officer and screamed at him to open a channel. In the background, a confused-sounding comm came in from the Marine, asking why everything was so green and why there was a crewman without a void suit in the airless bay.
Oh, God.
Sarge won the sprint and had the Vox halfway to his mouth when the Marine's confused questions changed to reports of incoming hostiles. Despite everything that happened afterwards, Sarge's reaction was about as perfect as was possible.
See, this is what lands the Marines in some spots of problems. This is what lands them in some areas of difficulty, because they just charge in and do exactly what they want to do. They don't have time to listen to anybody else but themselves. So they land in a chaos-infested area on a warp-infested ship when about 5 seconds of patience and asking where they should dock would have gone a long way. Space Marines.
In his best non-com voice, he bellowed at the Marine to disengage and pull his shuttle out of the bay. I'm not sure if you're familiar with how big and loud a Space Marine's voice is,
Yes.
but overriding one via pure volume and vitriol is a feat worthy of legend.
Yes, it is.
Every time the Marine tried to argue, or ask for clarification, Sarge just shouted over him in that parade ground voice he'd spent his life practicing.
Mm-hmm.
It was working, and everything might have turned out fine. If there hadn't been a second Marine, that is.
Oh, God damn it.
The other Astartes, who'd been spared the full brunt of Sarge's wrath, cut in and asked his battle brother if he'd tarnish the chapter's honor by running like a squad of guardsmen without a commissar. The first Marine rallied and announced his intention to enter the bay and deal with the hostiles that were evading his shuttle's weapons. Sarge switched tactics and frantically tried to explain that there weren't any enemies, and opening the airlock would let the warp fungus in, but dissolved into furious cursing when he heard the shuttle's lock cycle. With a final growl of, "This isn't a battle, you idiot! It is sanitation! You're going to get yourself killed fighting fungus!" He handed the Vox unit over to Doc and the Adepts. Doc and everyone else with more charisma than a dead Felid slowly explained the situation to the Marine that hadn't just contaminated himself. The rest of us stood there and listened to the sound of a Space Marine trying to kill Xenos that miraculously seemed to dodge every shot. Nubby and Amy started placing bets on how long it would be before the warp fungus, as we called it, ate through the Marine's power armor, and whether the Marine would even be able to notice. No one gave him good odds.
We're the greatest of them all. We're the best.
We all knew just how nasty the warp fungus could get. Hell, it had been some of us who'd first discovered this stuff. Standard operating procedures on the occurrence border was to just seal off any warp-tainted sections with nothing important inside. The lack of anything living to mess with kept the number of manifestations to a minimum, and anything that did appear usually faded before it could claw through the sealed bulkheads.
Oh.
Occasionally, though, something nastier than usual would appear and need dealing with. Nubby, Twitch, Fumbles, and recently Amy spent a lot of time watching for signs of this sort of stuff, and often got stuck with the job of fixing it. Anyway, the warp fungus was one of those nastier than usual things, but fixing it had been a bit of a problem. Fumbles had sort of heard it in the tainted shuttle bay months ago, back before we reached the Tau border worlds, in fact. He'd made such a fuss about the psychic noise it was emitting that Nubby and Twitch had agreed to risk a recon mission into the bay between warp jumps.
This is just, oh my god. It's bad when the Inquisitional ship shows up, infested with the warp. I love Space Marines to death, but sometimes they're just dumb.
They'd run in and pinpointed a large container labeled...
Thank you, Slacker. Slacker says, and I'm assuming he's talking about the Imperial size, they are supposed to be Ultramarine successors. We're sure they aren't Black Templar or Dark Angels. What about Word Bearers or maybe Blood Angels? They are Ultramarine successors. In fact, the size of the Emperor are Rabute Gilliman's blasphemy. His own blasphemy, you know, when he wrote the Codex Astartes, the size of the Emperor, I think it was the 125th Agita Company, they were an unofficial 11th company within the Ultramarines chapter until they were split off into the size of the Emperor. So, that's another reason I don't like Gilliman, because he was full of shit, forcing everyone to, you know, have 10 chapters while he had unofficial 11th in the Agita Company on Sotha. It is what it is. Refurbished Astartes is very true. Aren't all Astartes at this point refurbished unless they've been around since the the first strains of the Unification War? This is pretty much stock standard stuff. Thank you, Slacker. And if you guys didn't know, that is the actual backstory of the size of the Emperor. The size of the Emperor were sent to protect Sotha when the second founding happened. Am I like brain dead? There are size of the Emperor and Emperor's size. Am I brain dead and just going? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think size of the Emperor. Thank you. Dark Innovator says, don't go into a tainted bay. The Codex has started. It's not proven it. You know what, Leandro? Shut up. Thank you, Dark. Being a hypocrite is hardly a trait unique to Papa Smurf. That's true.
Potato Substitute. 15 ton.
Warden asks, aren't Astartes basically refurbished Primarchs? This is true. A Dreadnought is a refurbished Astartes. This is true. Rogel Dorn is hating this.
As the source of the noise. Because they were relatively savvy to how this sort of thing worked, they declined to actually open the container.
Good idea.
And just solve the problem in the same way they'd solved most of the others. Which is to say, they covered it with debt packs.
Really?
At the time, they'd declared victory when the explosion went off and the psychic noise stopped. But in retrospect, that had only served to spread the fungus all over the bay.
Yes, good idea.
While the noise hadn't returned, patrolling armsmen began reporting strange sounds, then disappearing. And then other armsmen reported hearing or seeing the missing ones. Over a dozen had vanished into the bay before Nubby and the rest took a second look. They'd found it covered with the fungus, which was in the process of dissolving everything less sturdy than the bay's blast-proof outer doors and walls.
Oh my god.
Also, it was filled with the missing armsmen, who were beckoning them inwards.
No.
Nubby, Fumbles, and Twitch had immediately shut the door and ran for it.
Good idea.
As they'd fled, a horde of orcs, gene stealers, and a few other varieties of Xenos appeared at the end of the hall and blocked their escape. Fortunately, Fumbles was along and realized that the new enemies were some sort of psychic illusion. The psycher was able to dispel the illusion without anything more serious than a temporal reversal of gravity happening, and the debatably heroic trio escaped. There'd been a few attempts to kill off the warp fungus after that.
Yeah?
Unfortunately, between its caustic nature, the hallucinations, and the fact that it was hellishly hard to kill, all that was accomplished was getting a few more armsmen and a whole lot of servitors melted. Eventually, someone suggested just voiding the bay, then leaving it open until the stuff died. That didn't work, but it did cause the stuff to go dormant unless something ventured into the bay.
And
Since
it's
we
the
didn't
best
actually
idea.
use the bay for anything, the captain had decided that the problem was no longer pressing, and we'd gotten back on our way.
There we go.
As a precaution, old Bill had reinforced the seal on all the bay's doors and vents. The only one allowed to go near it had been one of the senior tech priests. The cogboy had some ideas about chemical sprayers deployed by servo skulls, and Jim said he'd made some real progress. But the whole tech heresy thing had come up. Anyway, that's what the Space Marines had just landed in. A bay full of psychically active, highly caustic, and incredibly hard to remove warp fungus. Honestly, though, it was still only the third worst thing on the occurrence border they could have landed in.
True.
Our ship was definitely a little overdue for a tune-up.
It was overdue to be put into a star.
Through an absolutely heroic amount of persuasion, Doc and the Adepts managed to convince the Marines to abandon the bay. The second Marine, who identified himself as Sergeant Rebus, turned out to be very susceptible to logical arguments, and even helped talk Sergeant Gravis around before the fungus was able to melt through his boots.
Good.
We still didn't forgive him for screwing up Sarge's initial attempt, though, because even if Gravis was going to be fine, he'd cycled his shuttle's airlock twice in the warp fungus bay. There was no way that bird wasn't contaminated as hell.
Yeah.
We watched as not one, but two shuttles rose out of the bay. Neither of them looked anything like the Thunderhawks we'd expected when they'd told us we'd be working with Space Marines. Aside from being incredibly sleek, both of them were completely black, and only visible because our ship was acting as the backdrop. One of them was definitely having a little trouble flying in a straight line, though, and showed up as a faint ghost on the sensor tech's scopes. The other remained stubbornly invisible to all scanners as it settled in space in front of the bridge.
Thank you, Aquila. Aquila says, a space marine listening to logic? A miracle. Beyond a miracle is, start praising the throne instantaneously. Thank you, Aquila.
The decontamination process was not fast.
No.
The sprayer skulls had to be found and refilled. The contaminated shuttle had to be completely voided. And a holding area had to be set up. On top of that, the whole time this was going on, Sergeant Gravis and his shuttle's crew were, as Tink put it, tripping balls. Given how heavily armed they were, the situation was very uncomfortable.
Yes.
But luckily, no one was killed and only one sprayer skull was destroyed. After hours of tedious cleaning, not to mention angry shouting about whose fault this all was, our team met with the Space Marines in the Occurrence Border's fanciest conference room. Our planning session was short, direct, and absolutely terrifying.
Yay.
Sergeant Gravis and Rebus of the Emperor's Scythe Space Marine chapter were not what you'd call socialites.
Doubt it.
In fact, they were even more aloof than the few Marines we'd previously met. They stomped up into the conference room, still wearing their power armor, and didn't even bother to remove their helmets. It was unnerving as hell talking to them, and even Sarge couldn't hold on to his inquisitorial dignity in the face of those stares. Rebus did most of the talking, and started by explaining that there were two main objectives and would be two separate teams.
Okay.
The first team would consist of him and his 4 scouts. The second would consist of Sergeant Gravis and his 2 scouts, one of which would be piloting the shuttle, plus Interrogator Sergeant and his 5 inquisitorial guardsmen. Sarge hesitantly asked if we'd need any support staff in the field. This triggered a look of terror from Jim, Hannah, and all of the Adepts, but Rebus said that they wouldn't be necessary. From the far end of the table, Fumbles held up his hand and asked if he was coming. The Marines considered this, then asked if he was capable of using his powers while simultaneously fending off the hive mind's continuous psychic assault.
No.
Fumbles quietly put his hand back down.
That would be a no.
After waiting a few seconds to see if anyone else would interrupt, Rebus started explaining what the two teams would be doing. Our team would go to the third planet in the system, then find and capture a zoanthrope. His team would destroy the hive ship orbiting it. Everyone in the room just sat there and stared at the Marines as Rebus started explaining the transportation situation and timeline.
Oh, God.
Tink managed to overcome his shock before anyone else, and loudly asked the Marines if they were insane/retarded. Amy and Nubby snickered, and Doc hastily clapped a hand over Tink's mouth. Sarge took a deep breath and asked Sergeant Rebus to explain why, and more importantly, how, the Marines were going to destroy an entire Tyranid hive ship. Rebus met Sarge's stare, and said his chapter's primary interest in the system was ensuring that the Tyranids did not overwhelm the orcs and form a new splinter fleet. Capturing a live zoanthrope for the Inquisition was merely a side mission, a small favor to be completed when convenient. As for how, his team would board the hive ship and destroy it from...
Okay, I gotta read something that Mordecai put down. The named Space Marines in this are called Rubrum, Gravis, and Rebus, loosely translated from Latin into red, serious, and matters, or more colloquially, ruddy, serious business. Really serious business. That's the internet for you.
Within. Further details were not for those outside the chapter. All we needed to know was that the ship would die after we captured the zoanthrope.
Really?
But before their psi suppressants could wear off and allow the hive mind to destroy the beast. As everyone digested this, Twitch broke his remarkably long silence. The demolitions trooper volunteered that the Marines probably had a vortex bomb, since an explosive would merely scatter still living pieces of ship across the planet, and a poison or virus would require a lot of sampling, plus a nearby laboratory. Both Marines glared at Twitch, ignored them, and went back to fiddling with the mine he was holding. After some more awkward silence, Sergeant Rebus went back to explaining the mission details. Both teams would deploy in his stealth shuttle, since the warp fungus had gotten into the control systems of Gravis. First, we'd insert his team on the hive ship, then go down to the planet and capture the zoanthrope. The occurrence border would follow us in on low power and stop at the edge of the hive ship's shadow, where it could easily warp out in an emergency. If our mission went quickly, we'd return to it and drop off our prize before the shuttle extracted Rebus's team. Otherwise, we'd pick them up on the way back. It slowly dawned on us that the Marines' plan called for us to sit, as helpless passengers, in a shuttle that would not only be carrying a notoriously unstable warp weapon, but would also be closing to boarding range with a hive ship.
Oh my God.
Even without the swarm of orc fighters attacking the ship, and the fact that we might be making a second visit while that warp weapon was actually armed, it sounded incredibly dangerous. With them, not to mention the whole capturing a Xenos psycher thing, it sounded downright suicidal.
It is downright suicidal.
While the rest of us silently panicked, Doc hesitantly asked if it wouldn't make more sense to use both of the Marines' shuttles. Gravis, whose armor was sporting some truly impressive acid burns, glared at Doc and swore loud enough that we could hear him, despite the fact that he didn't have his helmet's speakers on. He bitterly suggested that we should have thought of that before neglecting the maintenance of our ship's shuttle bays, and then fell back into his sullen silence. Doc soldiered on despite his rebuttal, and asked whether the mission could be delayed until our tech priests fixed the fungus shuttle. Jim and Hannah made some panicked gestures, which seemed to imply that they had no idea how the stealth shuttle even worked. much less how to fix it.
Right.
Rebus ignored them, gave Doc a simple no, and announced that the briefing was over. We'd be leaving as soon as his scouts finished transferring equipment to the shuttle and Gravis's field repairs were completed. One of Gravis's scouts would deliver our mission-critical gear and explain the capture procedures to us in the meantime.
Okay.
With that, the two Marines stomped out. One by one, the Engineers, Adepts, and Fumbles followed them, leaving only us Guardsmen sitting there, feeling like we'd lost all control of the situation.
You have.
Now,
Alright, so, in part 1, we learned that they were going after probably one of the most dangerous creatures, well, not probably, one of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, with refurbished tech. Part 2, these Space Marines are fucking stupid. Part 3, get ready for it, guys. It's going to get heavy. I'm going to get up and do my eardrop things again. I'll be back at 1:10. Well, basically 10 after. Slacker says this job sounds like a job for the Death Watch. It's not just any old Astartes chapter. Usually, Slacker, it is. Usually, it very much is. I'm not, maybe they pissed off the Inquisition too. Maybe that's why they're here. It does kind of make sense with them sitting there, landing somewhere, being told to leave, and then immediately sitting there and trying to assault fungus that isn't orc in nature. Everybody get up, stretch, and I'll be back at a little bit before 11 after. But, this is only getting better and better because it keeps getting worse. And that's the way of things. Be back in a few seconds, you guys. Okay. If you guys are wondering how this feels, like if you see like an eyebrow, like one of my eyes just kind of narrow a little bit, it's because every once in a while I get these stabbing pains in my ear. and it feels like constant pressure. It's kind of annoying, to be honest with you. Um, it's just a constant pressure that just refuses to go away. But it's one of those things. It's actually better than it was yesterday, but at the same time, it is a pain. Um, let's see. Oh, what have you guys been talking about? The Psy's main thing is fighting Tyranids. Yeah, Diclonius, did they have to send the idiots to do it? Everything about the Master of Context says everything about this sounds like political mumbo jumbo for the size. Like they made someone angry. That's what I've been saying. It literally sounds, it literally sounds like they pissed someone off and wound up getting this assignment. Diclonius, yes, it's like they're just throbbing. They just hurt. It's better than it was yesterday. So if it seems like I was off yesterday and a little bit of today, and well, today, it is because of this. It's just a constant thing. Alright, here we go. And
We'd felt out of our depth before. Hell, that had been our default state of mind since the Inquisition drafted us.
True.
This was worse than usual, though.
Yeah, it's kind of a step up.
The Marines had left us feeling like children. It wasn't embarrassment over the shuttle thing.
No.
That was at least as much their fault as ours.
It was, yeah.
It was just that we felt incredibly outclassed by the 3-meter-tall killing machines. It was odd that the two Marines were so daunting, since, as Twitch pointed out, we'd actually killed 3 Chaos Marines during our missions. Doc suggested that the issue was that they were on our side.
True. Slacker, thank you. Swimmer's ear is a bacterial infection. Go see your doctor to get meds to treat it. The hospitaler has been talking to me about that. If this persists, I'm going to. But I've dealt with it before. I actually have some drops that help to treat it and kind of numb a little bit of it, but it is getting better. Like 2 days ago, I was wondering if I was going to be able to live stream because I was like, I'm going to have to go to the hospital, stuff like that, get something to take care of this, because I was having problems walking around the house.
The ones we'd killed were vile
Slacker.
traitors, deserving of nothing but scorn and death.
Yes.
But these two were physical manifestations of the Emperor's divine wrath.
Mm-hmm.
Or, to put it more simply, we couldn't compensate for our discomfort by trying to kill them.
That's always
Twitch
a
was
detriment.
halfway through suggesting that shooting the Marines just a little would make us feel better when Gravis' scout came in. And that was a very awkward moment.
Yes.
But the scout eventually accepted that it was just a little joke. None of
Yeah.
us would even consider doing such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly didn't dedicate large amounts of our time to planning complex betrayals of our allies. Well, unless they were Eldar. Or tech priests.
Mm-hmm.
Or deserters, cultists, heretics, annoying interrogators, commissars,
Right.
rogue traitors,
Yes.
rival inquisitorial teams,
That too.
or people who might be orcs in disguise.
That's everyone.
But since Marines and their scouts were none of these things, there was obviously nothing to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they really were orcs. They were much bigger and musclier than normal people, after all. Sarge put a stop to Twitch's newest paranoid fantasy before it even got started,
Thank you.
and asked the scout what was in the crates on the pallet he was pushing. The scout eyed us all dubiously and said it was our grav chutes. All of us digested the horrible implications of those 2 words and went quiet.
Oh, no.
Except for Nubby, that is, who was a little slower on the uptake.
That's because Nubby's an idiot.
Grav Watts shoots. What shoots? Grav shoots. What? You're Guardsmen. You must know what grav shoots are.
Oh, my God.
You know, small backpack-sized anti-gravitic devices that allow Imperial troops to float safely to the ground on a column of anti-gravitic force from any height in a world's gravity well, including suborbital heights. Oh, you mean screamy 4D death packs?
That is definitely, that's the most British way I've ever heard grav shoots explained. But at the same time, Nubby is now a grot, and I won't be. I said it last stream, they are most definitely orcs. That's what's happening to them. Twitch just hasn't caught on yet, or else he'd be mining themselves.
Yeah, we're familiar with those. What you doing with them? 'Cause I know a guy who knows a guy. They're for you to deploy from the shuttle with.
Oh my god.
You just said you're familiar with them. Surely I don't need to draw you a picture. What? Are you mental? When I say familiar, I mean we've pulled a bunch of them off deaders. None of us have ever used one. You can tell, because we're not pancake-shaped. That's unfortunate.
Oh, good
You
god.
have 2 hours to learn how to operate one.
Oh, no.
I'll assist in your training. Is there a nearby cargo bay or lift shaft we can use? Sarge? The baby space marine is trying to kill us, Sarge.
Really?
Why is everyone always trying to kill us, Sarge?
Thank you, Aquila. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more. Yeah. Why is Nubby the way that he is? Did he just honestly try to cut a deal with the Space Marine to sell the grav shoots? I don't...
The best term for our training with the
Oh,
grav shoots
God.
was crash course.
Thank you, Aquila.
The scout marine made sure our chutes were on, walked us to the edge of the shaft, then pushed us off. He claimed it was how he'd been trained, and the man evidently saw no reason why non-superhumans should learn any differently.
Yeah.
Sarge didn't let anyone argue. There wasn't time.
No, there's not time.
None of us enjoyed the experience of being thrown into a lift shaft with nothing but an underpowered anti-grav unit and a pair of tiny thrusters between us and pancakey death.
Yes.
It's hard to say who did the worst. It was pretty much a 3-way tie. Doc had so little control that he got stuck on a light fixture.
Nice.
And had to be rescued by the scout marine.
Nice.
The humiliation of being suspended by his pants halfway up the shaft was slightly overshadowed by the way that the scout marine had just cut them off, and then insisted he keep practicing instead of getting a new pair. While the scout was busy with Doc's rescue, Tink decided that he could convert his chute to a full jump pack using some of the techniques he'd been picking up working on his drone.
Tink, stop it!
It turned out he was wrong.
Yes.
So much so, in fact, that he had to be issued the only spare chute. Of course, Tink immediately declared that he knew what he'd done wrong, and started to retry the modifications using his replacement chute. Sarge had to take his tools away.
Yes.
Finally, Amy misinterpreted a suggestion to wear a helmet.
Every time I listen to this, I've been wondering what song I'm thinking of. This is the Cadian XX in TTRPG format.
Helmet as a comment on her hair. She tried to deck the scout and found out a Space Marine's jaw is a lot tougher than any non-augmetic hand. Doc, still pantsless, checked her hand and said it wasn't broken, so Amy grumpily resumed her training. For this part, the Scout Marine took the irrational attack in stride, but that was obviously the point where we lost the last of our credibility in his eyes.
Yes.
Despite all the difficulties and our teacher's disgust with us, we all managed to get down the shaft safely a few times before the training ended. We gathered up our gear, got Doc some new pants, and made our way to the bay where the unfungused stealth shuttle was being prepped. Once there, the Scout Marine brought out an impressively large sniper rifle and explained how the Zoanthrope's capture would work. We noticed that, unlike the previous lesson, the briefing consisted of nothing but short words, and included a lot of hand gestures as well as a few pictures. None of us commented, but Amy and Tink were obviously taking note of every little implied insult. The gist of the plan was that the stealth shuttle would sweep over the battlefield until we saw a zoanthrope. The shuttle would fly over the target, and then everyone but the pilot would deploy via grav chute. From there, speed was the name of the game. The estimated mission length was 10 minutes if our insertion was undetected, and 3 if it was. If we took any longer, Tyranid reinforcements would bury us.
Yes.
Our squad would secure a perimeter, and hold it against any Tyranids that came to support the zoanthrope, while Sergeant Gravis wore down the Xenos' psychic shield bubble thing. Once the shield was breached, the scout would shoot the zoanthrope with a specially tailored sedative and psi suppressant.
Okay.
And then we'd all fall back to the nearest possible landing area for extraction. It was the complete opposite of all the horribly complex ops we'd suffered through since joining the Inquisition. It was ultimately a simple, straightforward plan. If it wasn't for the fact that we'd be outnumbered thousands to 1, we'd have loved it.
Probably billions to 1.
As it was, though, there was no word for how much we hated that plan. Honestly, all of us, even Sarge, would have bailed if the 2 Space Marines hadn't shown up. None of us had the nerve to refuse the Astartes, so we boarded the shuttle and headed off to our certain deaths. The shuttle trip into the system was amazingly unpleasant. It wasn't that the stealth shuttle was crowded. There were only 13 of us in it, or 15 if you counted the seats taken by Spot and the vortex bomb.
Oh my god.
And the seats themselves weren't that bad either. Sure, they were a little on the big side, but Space Marines definitely spare a bit more budget for comfort when building a ship than the Guard does. So the ship was fine. The problem was the
That's something I wouldn't expect.
atmosphere being generated by our fellow passengers. They were too quiet. See, if it were a Guard shuttle, everyone would have been complaining, joking, or smoking.
True.
Even the driest Inquisition teams we'd been assigned to would have at least been doing some gear checks, or reminding us stupid Guardsmen what our job was. The Marines and their scouts just sat there and silently prayed or meditated or something. No talking, no moving, and hardly any breathing for hours upon bloody hours.
Oh no.
You'd think we could just ignore it. But any time one of us made the slightest bit of noise, the entire creepy lot would glare at us. Like, well, noisy children in a chapel. The silence wore on our nerves. There was nothing to do but think about the upcoming mission or stare at the ominous bulk of the vortex bomb, which was making the sort of unhearable noises we associated with a weak Geller field. We were all reaching our limit, and it was a race to see if Twitch or Amy would snap first.
It's gonna be Amy.
When Sarge decided that politeness was overrated. He commandeered one of Twitch's camo tarps and hung it across the shuttle interior, walling away the creepy superhumans, except for Gravis' scout. The big guy tried to glare us down by himself as we all started being as noisy as we damned well pleased.
There you go.
But we had him outnumbered, and Sarge threatened to pull a second tarp over him if he kept it up. The remainder of our approach to the Tyranid hive ship was spent the usual ways. Tink tinkered with Spot 2.0, removing the overweight skull probe disguise and trying to get a few of the systems he and Theo hadn't finished clutching together.
You're doing this with a tarp between you and Space Marines. The fuck is wrong with you?
They're functional. Doc wrote his usual soppy, "if I die on this mission" letter to his girlfriend, while Amy and Nubby read over his shoulder and made unhelpful suggestions. Twitch muttered to himself as he imagined hundreds of scenarios involving Tyranids and orcs. As his mind ran its crookeder-than-usual circles, He continuously moved gear and explosives between his bag and the massive pile of spares he'd brought. Sarge watched as we frittered away our time and saw that it was good. We all suffered a moment of heart failure as Sergeant Rebus tore down the tarp,
Eris, long list.
followed by another when the homemade cluster mine Twitch had been holding hit the floor. The Space Marine stood there and waited while we picked springs and, thank the Emperor unarmed, explosives out from under our seats. When the last bomblet had been collected, Rebus informed us that the shuttle was nearing the hive ship and would be switching to full stealth mode. We were to secure ourselves in our gear, put on our rebreathers, and stay out of his team's way while they deployed. We did as ordered, and a few minutes later the shuttle ride went from boring to terrifying. The cabin switched to emergency lights, the air vents stopped blowing, and the gravity deactivated. We floated in our seats for a few seconds, and the first evasive maneuver hit us. Let me tell you.
One thing about Astartes vessels, they really don't care about inertial dampening because they really don't feel this kind of shit.
No one thinks about those grav tied to a shuttle's engines seriously until they're turned off. Instead of the usual little jolts of spillover, they were as long, continuous pulls in seemingly random directions. We felt completely hopeless as we bounced and swung in our crash harnesses.
Yay.
Then Tink decided it might be better if we could see what was coming and anticipate the maneuvers.
No.
It was not.
No.
Who knows what the Marines and Scouts thought when Spot 2.0 drifted past them and entered the cockpit. They didn't actually say anything about it, and were already glaring at us for how loudly we were complaining about the turbulence. Anyway, they seemed just as interested as us when Tink projected the drone's vid feed on the front bulkhead. We all stared at the image of the massive Tyranid bioship looming in front of us.
Oh, God.
And then at the smaller shapes swarming around it. It was hard to say if there were more Orc fighters or Tyranid flyers. And either way, there was a constant stream of reinforcements rising from the planet and spewing from the hive ship.
Twitch is convinced he died.
It was complete chaos.
Twitch is convinced he died.
The space around the hive ship was filled with rockets, shells, bioplasma, pyroacid, and millions of tons of wildly spinning debris. And for some reason, we were flying right into it.
Yay!
Bloody Space Marines. All of us just sat there and stared. And then we saw the cause of one of those evasive maneuvers. A speck suddenly grew into a fighter, and then zipped past by such a thin margin that we could see the Orc piloting it.
Yay.
A split second later, it was followed by a stream of bioplasma and a Tyranid interceptor. Doc swallowed, Twitch whimpered, and Amy swore. Variations of that scene repeated dozens of times as we closed with the hive ship. It's hard to say which was more amazing. The way the Scout Marine pilot twisted away from every impact with bare meters to spare, or the fact that none of the hostiles saw our shuttle, even while nearly colliding with it. Our slow approach to the hive ship through that space battle was a terrifying and humbling reminder that if Guardsmen's nerves are steel, Space Marines are adamantium. Not that we actually had what you might call nerves of steel.
No.
All of us were scared shitless. And when the pilot took cover from a pyroacid barrage behind a Landa that was visibly filled with commandos, Twitch went from scared to full-on freaking out, man. When Twitch started gibbering, Sarge barked orders at Tink and Doc to turn off the projection and prep a trank. But none of us had anywhere near the same speed as the panicked demolitions trooper.
Oh, God.
In a startling amount of time, Twitch had cut his way out of his crash harness and relocated to a more defensible position.
Oh, God.
Leaving a trail of det packs floating in the air behind him. Said defensible position turned out to be the small amount of space between the vortex bomb and the seat that held it.
No.
Sarge immediately undid his own restraints and launched himself across the shuttle, only to wind up pinned against a pair of unhappy scout marines as the pilot evaded something or other. A rain of jetpacks landed on everyone on that side of the shuttle.
Nice.
Guardsmen and marine alike. And Sergeant Gravis decided that enough was enough. The Space Marine's boots adhered to the floor with a deep clang as he left his seat. Most of us watched in amazement as the Space Marines slowly stomped across what the shuttle's acceleration meant was actually a wall. Twitch, though, was too busy with his paranoid panic attack to notice, until a massive hand snapped out and pulled the detonator from his grip, that is.
Thank you.
Sergeant Gravis had probably thought that removing the detonator would neatly,
No.
diffuse the situation.
Oh, God, that pun.
He was completely wrong, of course,
Yes,
but
he
the
is.
theft did focus Twitch's attention on him instead of imaginary commandos. Unfortunately, that attention took the form of a thrown object, which adhered to the Space Marine's hand when he tried to bat it away. We could practically hear the gears in Sergeant Gravis's head whirring as he registered the jetpack stuck to his palm and the two detonators which had practically materialized in Twitch's hands.
Oh, my God.
The giant in the acid-pocked armor stared into the wild eyes of the demolitions trooper, who was currently lying across a vortex bomb and accusing him of being one of them, and decided that intimidation and force were not viable options.
No, they're not.
So in the gentlest voice a half-ton hybrid of man and tank can manage, he tried reason. Gravis started by asking Twitch to calm down. That worked about as well as you'd expect.
Yes.
The Space Marine then tried explaining that there were no enemies in the shuttle. Everyone here was Twitch's ally. Twitch responded by chucking another jetpack at him and screaming, "That's what they all say!" And the mask comes off.
Oh, God.
This seemed to confuse Gravis. So Doc helpfully explained that he'd just been accused of being an orc in disguise.
Uh-huh.
Gravis pointed out that Twitch was obviously insane, which won him yet another jetpack and a scream of, "They all say that, too!"
Thank you, Slacker. Slacker says, Twitch has a detonator, backup detonator, and a backup detonator. This is... I have been thinking about the Canadian XX song ever since I put two and two together with these. And yes, Twitch has a detonator for every day of the week. Thank you, Slacker. It is ridiculous. An Ultramarine was trying to help calm down a paranoid with words. Yes, Ronnie.
At that
Chicken wing analogy now has the best comment of the entire stream. Twitch is so crazy he made a Marine back down and try diplomacy. X is in chat. That was it.
point,
That's pretty much true.
Gravis must have been losing confidence in his strategy,
Yes.
because he turned and asked the rest of us what to do. Nubby, Amy, and Tink all simultaneously made unhelpful suggestions, and Sarge was too busy clinging onto Sergeant Rebus's seat as yet another evasive maneuver tried to fling him across the shuttle. Doc told the Marine he was doing fine. This sort of argument was pretty much the standard operating procedure if no one managed to trank Twitch before he got the explosives out.
Yeah.
He suggested that Gravis continue by taking off his helmet and proving he wasn't an orc. Twitch agreed that the orc should show us his real face. So he did. Tink's shout of, "What happened here?" was cut off by Doc's hand. Amy cackled until Nubby pointed out that the Marine still had most of his hair.
Uh-huh.
Sarge asked what was going on, and Twitch admitted that Gravis wasn't an orc. Probably. In the incredibly awkward silence that followed, Sergeant Gravis put his helmet back on. His scout marine glared at us, and Twitch asked if someone would help him off the vortex bomb. He was stuck. Gravis collected both Twitch and Sarge, who was still clinging to the meditating Sergeant Rebus for dear life, and deposited them both in their seats. As the Marine stomped around, he talked to us, giving us a morale-boosting lecture he claimed was given to him as an acolyte on his first boarding mission. We were instructed not to worry about what we couldn't control, and to focus on remembering glorious victories of the chapter, or, in our case, the Cadian regiments. Nubby asked what was so special about those nutters. This caused a pause in the motivational speech. It was eventually established that our regiment wasn't from Cadia, Catacan, Krieg, Delicia,
Yes.
Maccabeus,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Talarn,
Right.
Vostroya,
Right.
or any other world famous for its contribution to the Guard. Furthermore, our regiment had never accomplished anything other than serving as cannon fodder for more important Imperial forces. No glorious victories for us. At an indignant objection from our markswoman, this was adjusted to no glorious victories from anyone except Amy and her knobby regiment of knobby knobs. Sergeant Gravis stared at us, then asked what in the Emperor's name we were doing in the Inquisition. Sarge sighed, picked a stray det pack, which had adhered to his sleeve, and admitted that not a day went by when he didn't ask himself the same question. The rest of the approach to the hive ship passed without incident. At least, as far as us passengers were concerned, that is. The pilot definitely had to dodge a whole lot of something over the last few minutes, though. Thank the Emperor, Tink never turned the vid feed back on. At a word from the pilot, Sergeant Rebus and his 4 scout marines sprang out of their seats and positioned themselves around the vortex bomb. A few moments later, there was a squishy impact and the stealth shuttle's rear door opened to reveal a pulsating wall of fleshy stuff. The scouts painted it with something, Rebus stabbed it with his power sword, and a gap was pried open. To our disgust, the 5 Marine boarding party then smeared themselves with the juices running from the gap. Once they and the vortex bomb were good and covered, they pulled on some camellia-lined cloaks that looked far better than any that had ever been issued to us lowly guardsmen, and climbed through. Sergeant Gravis planted a probe-looking device in the gap behind them, and then sealed it with some big staple things and some chemical spray. When the gap was closed, we heard Gravis and Rebus do a comm check and schedule the pickup. Then the shuttle's door silently closed and we started drifting away.
Okay.
From docking to undocking, the whole boarding operation took just under 5 minutes.
Okay.
It was the most impressive display of efficient professionalism we'd ever seen. And I'm not sure any of us drew a breath during the whole thing. We all prayed to the Emperor that we wouldn't have to be on the shuttle during their pickup. There's a moral about getting what you wish for in there somewhere. We descended to the planet alongside the hail of spores spewing from the hive ship. It went a lot faster and required fewer evasive maneuvers than our approach had, which was good for our frayed nerves. Now that Sergeant Rebus and his team of suicidal supermen had departed, Gravis and his scouts became a little more chatty. The scout piloting the shuttle brought the gravity up enough to keep us in our seats, and told Gravis that he was starting scans. Gravis brought out an oversized data slate and began staring at it with the other scout.
Slacker, thank you, Slacker. Slacker says, I reiterate that they are still the best Inquisition squad in the sector at the minimum. And that's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. Thank you, Slacker. Good old Mass Effect 2 mission? What? If you've ever... Mr. Rex says, if you've ever eaten deep-fried crickets, I imagine they taste like that. No.
They didn't seem to
I never had those, and I'm not sure I ever do want to.
think that we really needed to take part in the discussion, But when Tink sent his drone to hover over their shoulders, Gravis decided it was easier just to let us participate.
Yes, it is easier.
Gravis and his 2 scouts were searching the battlefield below us for signs of zoanthropes. Specifically, they were looking for big old bolts of warp lightning which could be traced back to the Xenos psycher firing them.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds fairly simple.
It does.
But given how far up we still were and how much of a mess the battlefield was, we decided that it was pointless to try and help. While the Marines strained their eyes, the rest of us concentrated on the sort of things us lowly guardsmen find important.
Yes.
Namely weather, terrain, and hostile positions. These turned out to be acid rain, wasteland with giant spiky rocks, and everywhere.
Yay.
In short, it wasn't a place we wanted to go anywhere near, much less drop onto via grav chute.
Yay.
Nubby and Tink started the argument by complaining about the suicidal nature of the mission, and suggesting that we just lie on the report, which prompted the Scout Marine to tell us to grow a backbone and a proper sense of duty. Amy told him where he could stick his backbone and sense of duty, and things went downhill from there. Sadly, there wasn't time to get a real good fight going. We only managed a bit of name-calling and a few anatomically improbable threats before Gravis finally spotted some warp lightning. Sarge, Doc, and Twitch stared at the data slate with the Marine. The section of battlefield he was looking at was a complete free-for-all between the orcs and nids.
Nice.
And a particularly dense cluster of jagged rocks was emitting bursts of lightning. Gravis said that the frequency of the bolts indicated it was a lone psycher, and went on to point out that the position was not strongly defended against an airborne insertion. He suggested that we move on the target immediately, before it was killed or the battle shifted. But Doc and Sarge didn't like that they couldn't see inside the pile of rock the psycher was hiding in. And Twitch was Twitch.
Twitch is Twitch.
Sarge asked Gravis how sure he was that A, there wasn't a whole hive's worth of nids in there, and at Twitch's insistence, B, that the lightning-shooting Xenos wasn't actually an orc.
A weird boy.
Gravis just glared at us and said he was 73% certain that this was an acceptable target. Our fearless leader tried to stare down the Space Marine for about 5 seconds, then decided that this sort of decision, not to mention arguing with the Astartes, was above his pay grade.
Yes, it kind of is.
Sarge rounded on the rest of us and started bellowing orders to prep for deployment. Tink got spot stealthed up and verified that our scopes were synced. Nubby and Amy flung a final few insults at the Scout Marine. Doc tried to remember which button was which on his grav chute.
Ronnie says he thinks that Nubby joined the Imperial Guard by stealing someone else's recruitment papers on accident. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case at this point.
And Twitch angrily grabbed a last armful of explosives while muttering about no one taking orcs seriously. When everyone was ready, we formed up behind Sergeant Gravis and his scout.
Alright, place your bets on what this
is. A
is.
few minutes later, the shuttle hatch slammed open. The Space Marines stepped out into the air and dropped out of sight. Sarge followed him to the edge, looked down, and froze as he saw just how far down and covered with pointy things in Xenos the ground was.
Oh my god.
Then the Scout Marine pushed him. Now, just to be clear, while there are entire regiments of Guardsmen dedicated to doing grav drops,
the
rest of us think they're insane.
Yes.
Even your average catechin will call an Elysian or any other type of drop trooper an adrenaline-hungry madman.
This is true.
And mind you, that's coming from someone who would gleefully try to kill a war boss with nothing but a combat knife.
Yes.
I mean, who in their right mind flies all the way to the battlefield in a perfectly functional shuttle, then drops out of it while it's still half a click off the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Dropping through the ground towards a pile of rocks that resembled nothing so much as a giant demonic hedgehog
Yay.
was not on the list of things we joined the guard to do.
Well, it looks like meat's back on the menu,
fact
boys.
that there was a hostile psycher inside said rocks, not to mention the bloody melee of orcs and Tyranids around them, did not make it any more attractive.
Mr. Reich, of course Cutter would do this. Cutter would be out the... Like, he'd be racing the actual Space Marines out the door for this.
If it wasn't for the fact that Sergeant Gravis was already on the ground and clearing our landing area, we all would have stayed in that shuttle. Also, the Scout Marine kept pushing us. Despite how unpleasant we found the drop, the painfully direct training we'd received meant we all made it down in one piece. One piece doesn't mean cleanly, though. Only Sarge and Nubby made what could be called good landings.
Yay.
And that's only if you count landing on an unsuspecting orc and Hormagaunt as good. Doc and Amy wound up colliding with each other in the air and made an awkward dual landing on one of the jagged spires. Amy managed to stick the landing and started picking off targets. But Doc wound up sliding off and bouncing to the ground with a terrified pinball.
Nice.
Tink outright stopped his descent by having Spot come up under him. He happily shot into the melee from his perch until a flesh borer to the leg reminded him that hanging in the air, where there is no cover and everyone can see you, is a terrible idea. Luckily, he landed next to Doc. Twitch did not hit anything, but he swerved around a lot for some reason. Sergeant Gravis had cleared us a beachhead, and those of us who hadn't gotten shot or cracked a rib on the way down widened it. That was our first chance to use the pulse weapons Tink and Theo had designed for us on soft targets, and it was glorious. No heresy intended, but Tau carbines blow lasguns out of the water. They hit harder than a hot shot and reload easier too. We were dropping nids and
I'm gonna ignore this heresy.
orcs left and right, and it was gratifying to see Sergeant Gravis stop and stare at us when he ran out of enemies. The Space Marine didn't stop for long, or ask about our sexier-than-standard issue weapons. Once he was sure we had the perimeter on lockdown, he switched to his power sword and made his way to the cluster of fallen spires that was occasionally illuminated by blasts of lightning. The scout, who was perched similarly to Amy, and had stolen at least 3 of her kills, started following his boss by jumping from spire to spire. The official plan called for us to leave them to it. We were just supposed to secure a landing area for the shuttle and keep reinforcements out. We were doing far better than expected, though, and Sarge started feeling all, I'm this big Inquisition guy who helps instead of just following orders.
Yeah.
So he followed Gravis to lend a hand with the Zoanthrope, and Twitch tagged along for his own reasons.
Oh, God.
The rest of us were more than happy to stay put and just keep shooting any orcs or Tyranids that wandered our way. Looking back, holding that perimeter was far too easy. There was never a concentrated attack on our position, just the occasional Xenos who retreated in our direction or was checking out what all the plasma fire was coming from.
Yeah.
We thought that the Xenos were just keeping each other busy.
They're not.
The Tyranids weren't pouring in to reinforce their psychic artillery.
It's a trap. X is in chat if you think there's a trap coming in.
Unit, because the orcs were in the way. We didn't realize that something had gone wrong until Sergeant Gravis flew out of the side of the rock pile.
Okay.
Well, not flew exactly.
Ah, shit.
More like was thrown.
Yeah, I figured.
Something like 1.5 tons of power-armored space marines sailed through the air like a thing that is very bad at sailing. Crashed through 4 of the smaller rock pillars, and barely activated its grav chute in time to dodge a fatal collision with the larger 5th. Doc tried to ask Sarge what the hell just happened, but our fearless leader was busy screaming, swearing, and firing his pulse carbine on full auto. When Doc tried again, Twitch cut in, and in a slightly hysterical tone told us that Sarge was busy right now. He suggested that anyone who wanted to live should get some cover between themselves and the rock pile.
Yay.
We didn't need telling twice.
No, you shouldn't.
Since we were keeping our heads as far down as was anatomically possible, and it turned out that Sarge was half blind and Twitch wound up getting a nasty concussion, no one really saw what happened next. Luckily, Spot recorded the whole thing.
Oh, yay.
A few seconds after Twitch's warning, he and Sarge came out of the rock pile at a dead sprint. They dove behind the first pillars they could find, and a split second later, the entire cluster of collapsed pillars exploded.
Oh, this is not a good sign.
3 green glowing projectiles were propelled out of the hole Sarge and Twitch had exited, and splattered apart against the rock Amy was perched on. One of them, or a piece of debris, must have clipped Twitch's pillar too, because a sizable chunk broke off the top and nailed him in the helmet. He managed a dazed "told you so" before collapsing. In the aftermath, Doc ran over to check on Sergeant Twitch. The rest of us kept our eyes on the perimeter, except for Amy. She descended from her gore-covered perch with a cry of, "Oh God, it's everywhere. I think some got down my shirt. Tell me this isn't mashed Tyranids."
Yeah.
Sarge blearily sat up and told her not to worry. It was only smashed orcs.
Oh.
This did not improve Amy's mood.
It wouldn't.
Sarge calmed Gravis, verified that both the Marines had survived the blast, and made sure the shuttle was on its way to pick us back up. While we waited and shot the occasional orc or nid that took an interest in us, Sarge explained what had happened inside the rock pile.
Okay.
Sarge had followed Gravis down a sort of tunnel that headed towards where the warp lightning was coming from. The Space Marine had been sprinting ahead and had obviously intended to rush the psycher with his power sword before it could notice and fry him with lightning.
Right.
Sarge caught up just in time to see Gravis exit the tunnel and pull off the close to melee range part of the plan. But the Xenos psycher hadn't been the frail ranged support unit they'd expected.
Right.
Instead, Sergeant Gravis wound up face to face with a big ol' psychic, not to mention psychotic and psychopathic, orc.
Figures.
To the Space Marine's credit, he hadn't hesitated at all. He'd waded right in and started chopping and stabbing while Sarge gave covering fire. Unfortunately, the weird boy had a bunch of bodyguards, and they bought him enough time to do some warpy stuff.
Yeah.
Sarge said the moral of the story was, if a warp energy infused orc charges you with supernatural speed and a big glowy stick, it is a far better idea to dodge his swing than to try to block it with your power sword.
Yes.
So, when the Space Marine got knocked out of the park, Sarge decided it was time to leg it. He'd made liberal use of flash grenades and nearly ran into Twitch on his way out. Twitch had apparently been picking out the detonators for the det packs he'd, without bothering to tell anyone, dropped all over the rock pile on his way down. Anyway, Sarge had held the weird boy and his surviving minders off long enough for Twitch to sort out which buttons he wanted to press.
Yes.
And they got out of the rock pile seconds ahead of the explosion. The orcs hadn't, which was why Amy was picking pieces of them off her armor.
Ah, well, good on him.
Sergeant Gravis and his scout rejoined us just
Twitch is a walking WMD.
as Sarge finished his story. Nubby, ever the diplomat, asked if their bug hunt had gone as well as our perimeter securing had.
No.
Amy and Tink snickered, but Sarge shut the 3 of them up. The 2 Marines didn't look like they were in any mood for bullshit. Between the acid damage and the new set of dents and scratches, Gravis's armor was beginning to look rather ragged, and the scout looked even worse. He'd apparently been trying to find a hole in the top of the pile to snipe through, and didn't have the same hardwired response to a warning from Twitch that us Guardsmen did. His stealth cloak was completely ruined, plus there were at least 2 sizable holes in his carapace armor. He was still alive, though, and rather rudely turned down Doc's offer to patch him up. So we figured he was fine and had learned an important lesson about warnings from demolitions troopers. The stealth shuttle dropped out of the clouds above us, and we got back into the air without further incident. All of us more or less collapsed into the oversized seats. Despite the fact that we'd only been on the ground for about 15 minutes, and only 2 of us had been noticeably injured, we were exhausted.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Our rest didn't last long, though.
Doubted it.
Despite the perfectly reasonable suggestions some of us made concerning calling the mission off and pinning the blame on Mr. 73% certain it's an acceptable target, Sergeant Gravis both immediately started searching for another Xenos psycher.
Yes. Alright. So that was Tyranid Acquisition Experts Parts 1 through 4. Oh my god. The amount of things that is wrong with these situations, they're starting to convert some of them to their cause, some of the Space Marines to their cause. And now, simply because of the fact that I can't get it out of my head now, I remember the theme song of this group of Guardsmen. Hold on. And quite simply put, it's fitting. It's so fitting for them. It's not even funny. So, let us listen to the song of our people. Here we go. Let us listen to the song of this inquisitorial group. Yes.
Keep up the pace.
Yes.
Don't let yourself lose the count for a second. Remember which end the bullets come out of, and the most important lessons.
I said I'd follow you through anything, hell or high water. But she's convenient now, cause most say sits beside you are just hell. Others call it survival skills, but I know now it's just up to luck. Or squat somewhere between a pending cluster bomb and a clusterfuck. For everyone that falls, another can rise up to take their place. As long as you want the corpse, they replace. This is this inquisitorial group. Yes, this is Sarge singing this song. We'll be dead and gone before we know it. So when I die, shift the numbers up once more, replace me. Won't smile well. Yakety sax. All of your guns, all of your calls. The bad ones most of all, they define you. They're the lowest standard we can strive to. This is the song of this group. It is the truth of this group. If only they had the Baneblade, yes. Which they have done a number of times. It is glorious. Ah, hell, I'm gonna let it play.
Keep up the pace, think on your feet, look around the flaws and plans, and while we're breathing, count our blessings, Savior, come, this shit gets messy.
I've listened to this song quite a bit, if you guys can't tell. Flash. Yes, they will it. Oh my god. If it's only friendly fire if it hits a guardsman. No, it's only friendly fire if it hits somebody above the rank of sergeant. Don't give Tink any ideas. He would do this. Tink would flash rip. This is this inquisitorial group, bar none. Quite literally, that song is what I'm thinking of every time they come on from now on. This is glorious. In any case, guys, that was Tyranid Acquisition Experts episodes 1 through 4. I am sorry I torture you with my horrible singing voice. It is what it is. I'm just having fun. Tink would probably get Nubby to steal a battle suit. Yes, I every single time Nubby is anywhere on a planet, I'm expecting something. I'm expecting shit to happen. I'm expecting something to get stolen, something ridiculous. I'm just expecting something ridiculous. Hey, you have a nice day, Guardsmen Enjoyer. Thomas says, we have drop shoots that can carry like 3 or 4 Bane Blades, but yes, but can we put grav shoots on them and float them down? Someone needs to get String Storm to make a song for this. I agree. Thank you, Aquila. What do you get when you cross Nubby's and Twitch's private stashes? High explodes. Yes. Oh, God. Oh, come on, Aquila. That was a bad pun. It was accurate, but it was a bad pun. Well, no, you get Vortex Bombs, because then you're really stoning out of your ass. Our nukes... Thank you, Aquila. Our nuke says, a Tal battlesuit is just power armor. More or less. Nubby would make a great Blood Raven. Yeah, he actually would. Nick's Fish says, at some point all the guardsmen will be in power armor. They just keep getting better gear. You know what? I doubt that that's not going to be the case. Aquila says, puns let me steal other people's lifetime. Diclonius, we need String Storm to cover Cutter's last stand. Oh, come on, dude. That would be fucking awesome. That would be fucking awesome. In any case, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be streaming this next weekend, starting on Saturday. I hope you guys are going to be around for that. I am going to go actually lay down for a bit because this has gotten pulsing now. Yeah. I had fun. This is about as ridiculous as I thought it was going to be. Whatever you guys do for the rest of the day, guys, enjoy yourselves. Have fun, all right? And I'm going to start pressing buttons in a second here. Thank every one of you for coming out and, being here with me today. And, yeah, I'm going to be hopefully getting well very soon. I'll catch you guys next time. And I got to press buttons here. Here, 1, 2, 3,